So a higher order function, just in JavaScript terms, it's a function that takes a function as a parameter and or returns a new function. So what we're going to cover is higher order array methods. But what is a method really? It's a function. So we're going to look at higher order array functions. So these are pre-built array functions like splice that take a function as an argument. Yeah, and use it for us. And the reason why these exist is how many of you like writing a for loop? You might like it, but eventually you may have to write hundreds of them. Would it be nice if we had functions that did loops for us? We do. They're higher order array functions, or higher order array methods. So let's look at the first and most basic and kind of a wild card of them because it works a little, doesn't do the exact same thing as the rest, but it's called .forEach. .forEach. Has anyone seen this in like Stack Overflow? You see something like .forEach or .filter or .map. They're all very intimidating. Even Bob would say this. I remember when Bob was teaching this. He's like, the first time I saw array method, higher order methods, I ignored them because no. But then once you start to use them and people see that in your code, they're like, you innately are seeing what's going on beneath the hood. These take some work to get to know, but they are straightforward once you use them. You just have to imagine an invisible for loop because that's what happens when you say for each item, do the following. And it's going to loop and do the following for each item. So for each to start off with, then we'll look at filter, then we'll look at map. For each. So we have an array. Of numbers. And what we would like to do is create a new array with all those numbers times by 10. So we want to fill in this new array with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. How would we do that with a for loop? For let I equal 0, what would be my stopping point? Yeah, I want to loop through the array's length. So I could hard code it as 7, or yeah, 7. But if I ended up adding more numbers to this later, I'd have to go change my for loop. But if I just say array length, now it's going to go 8 or 9 times instead of 7 because it's naturally looking at how many items there are. And I++. So how would I push in this number times 10 into this array? New array dot push. And then how do I access this item within the for loop? Yeah, the current array index we're on times by 10. And once it's over, we'll console log our new array to see if it worked. Please do what I tell you. Cool. So with any questions on this line? There's a couple brackets going on there. So the first time this goes through, array bracket I evaluates to 1 times 10, and it pushes 10 into the array. The second times through, array bracket I is the number 2. It pushes that in, it goes all the way through to the end. Okay. So now let's do this with a for each. Because a for each is just like a for loop. We didn't return anything in this for loop, right? We created a new box before we did the for loop so that we could create that box, or what should be inside of it as our for loop loops. What happens if I say return in a for loop? It stops completely. It never goes again. Even if it's on the first loop, it never goes again. So just like the for loop, for each doesn't like the word return. It does nothing within a for each. Okay, so higher order methods. They are methods. So how would I say, how would I call split on this array or splice? Yeah, I say, here's my array, I'd like you to splice it. These methods are no different. I'll say array for each. But what happens is for each does a for loop and provides me the current item it's looping over. And that's what we get access to inside of this array. So if we're doing this before ES6 syntax, it would look like this. We would say function. And this function brings along with it every item in the array, one at a time. I'm going to console.log item, just to see what does this item actually represent. Comment this out so nothing shows that we don't need. And node app.js, there's our 9 numbers. So you have to think about this function parameter is literally this, but just with nicer syntax. It's like, hey, array for each item in my array, provide me that item so I can do something with it. So this alone is creating this whole for loop for me, automatically looping through the length of this array. So within on line 16, how could I push in the current number times 10? Because in here we had to say array bracket I times 10, but now what can we say inside of this method? Yeah, item times 10. Same thing. And then we will then console log our new array at the end. Get the same result. Ooh. Following. It's a higher order methods are heavy. So we're gonna hit this. Let's keep hitting this. So let's say we had to write our own for each for a second. Yes. We would say function for each. And for each needs to be given some sort of callback. Well, what it will do, it will need an array and a callback. It will set up the for loop for you, whatever array you're calling it on, which would reference this array right here. And for every item in that array, it's going to call your callback and pass that item into it. So under the hood, when we say for each item, it's saying, great, let me loop over the array, and I will call your function with every item passed into it. So we're getting array bracket I passed in every single time. We don't want to have to write this every time. That alone looks pretty confusing. This is a lot nicer to look at. But you have to think for loop. If we were doing this with ES6 syntax, you don't need the function word, as long as you add the add arrow. And that's even more like English to read. You say, hey, array, for each item inside of this array, push that item times 10 into a new array. And how many times will this line of code run? Yeah, so right now it's going to run 9 times. Because there's 9 items in this array, it's going to give us the item one at a time. Just like the for loop does with array bracket I. So whatever I write in here, I'm doing for every single item in the array that I called it on. But for each is the only higher order method, because as you'll find out as we go over these higher order methods, one way to organize them in your head is by what they return. What does this higher order method return? Because that's where they become useful. For each is the only one that will always return undefined. So we'll never say const new array or something like that equals, because regardless of what I do in here, even if I say return 10, this will still be undefined once it's all done. So for each is just like a for loop. We don't want to return in it because it will just not work. Yeah. So that's for each.
Is it always item?
It's a function parameter, which I get to name whatever I want. So this is good. We want to think of plural and singular, right? Here's our collection of numbers. So maybe a better name for this, we'd say numbers. So numbers for each. And this is going to give us access to each singular item. So what would be a sensible thing to call an individual item in that array? Maybe num or number. Then we can say push in the number that we were just given times 10. Number and numbers are pretty close, so maybe I'd stick to num. But what you call this is up to you. It just represents each individual item as the higher order method is doing its loop. That cool. Filter.
What if you have an array of arrays?
Then you might have to put a forEach inside of a for loop, or a forEach inside of a forEach. Whenever you got nested arrays, you're thinking matrix, nested for loop. Okay, so filter. What does filter return? It will always, always, always return a new array. So it does not alter the array you give it. It creates a new array from what you tell it to do to that array and gives you that new array back. Super helpful. Denoted by the name, what could we expect filter to do? Sort stuff? No, filter stuff. Yes, I can give it an array of numbers and say, only give me back the even ones. And it will create a new array of just the even numbers inside of it. Or say, you know, I'm looping over an array of users and say, only give me the users that are logged in currently. I can slim down this data set to a smaller set of data. Where is filter used in real life?
Search bars.
Search bars. Amazon. When I am on Amazon and I say I would like to look at pet supplies, maybe some dog food. Let's see if this, and I get all these little like refined by over here. Right now I'm just getting all the results from their database or their top results. Then I can say, hey, filter these results to be chicken flavored. And a filter just occurred to loop over this big array of objects we see here and say only return the ones that have a chicken as its flavor. And then we get this subset. So we're slimming down our array of data that the user is interacting with. This is like a good example of how that's used in real life. We're just asking them to filter down more and more as we click on more of these items. So filter. All numbers. And we're going to see if we can get just the even numbers back. So what does filter return? Cool. So I will declare a variable, save the result in, and then I will say all my numbers, I would like you to filter through them. Now, fortunately, all of these have pretty much the same syntax. So just like we wrote num here as this function, we can do the same thing here. And I'll write it with a pre-ES6 syntax first. So function, brackets, hit enter. What would be a sensible thing to call each item in this array? No. Okay. How do you know if a number is even or odd in JavaScript? Modulo. Who has never heard the word modulo before? Or modulus? Who has seen this symbol? The percentage sign.
The reminder.
Yeah. So it's an operator. What it does, it's the remainder operator. So quickly in Replit here, if I said console.log 5 modulo 3, what would we get? 2, because 2 is the remainder after 5 is divided by 3. So modulo is the remainder operator. Well, what is 5 divided by 5? There is no remainder. So we can see if the number modulo 2 is 0, then it's an even number because it's equally divisible by 2. Because while 5 goes into 5 perfectly, 2 goes into 6 perfectly, so we'll also get 0. Now, if it's an odd number, it was not, oh, well, 1's a wild card. Okay, that's my bad. Then that's going to work. Okay, bad example. But modulo 2, that's how we know if it's even. Let's see that in action. So if the current number we're on divided by 2 turns out to not have a remainder, then it is an even number. Now, I said before that for each is the wild card. It is the only one that never returns something. All the other higher order methods, you have to say return it. So in here, I'm going to say return the number if it's divisible by 2. And then I'll console log the result. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. What would I have to switch about the if statement to get all odd numbers instead? Yeah, I could say if divisible by 2, there's a remainder of 1. Or I could just say if the num is not divisible by 2 evenly. Yeah. So saying not equal to 0 is pretty safe. Now we get just the even number subset as an array. But if I console logged all numbers below here, it would still look just like this. Filter doesn't change your original array. It gives you a new array from what you told it to filter out. So I could be very explicit. If the number is equal to 5, return it. What am I going to get back in this case? Yeah, I'll still get back an array with just the 5 in it, because I told it to look through my entire array of numbers and only return it into this new array if it was equal to 5.
So I guess if you're filtering through a huge array of data or a search bar, you probably will use 2 equal signs to pull out something similar to what they're searching for.
Yeah, it's dependent kind of on the situation, but I see what you're saying. There would be cases to use double. We'll always start off with triple in case there's a necessity otherwise. What's hard, I think the hard thing about the return statement with this is we're used to return ending your function. This doesn't end filter. This ends the function that filter is using so that it can move on to the next item in the array. So we say start on 2, run the function, do the function, either return or just leave, and then call the function again with the number 3 passed into it so we can do this. Then call the function again with the 4 and do this. So every time we say return, it's ending this function and moving to the next item. It's not ending the filter. The filter only ends once it gets to the end of the array. So we're safe to say return. In fact, we have to say return. Okay, so that's filter. If I had to rewrite this with ES6 syntax, just so we can see them side by side, I'll put it here for notes. All numbers dot filter, but now this function, that word doesn't need to be there, so I can just say parentheses with num in it, fat arrow, and then ask the same equation. What else could I get rid of with this function? Yeah, single parameter, I don't even need the brackets there. And if we want to get really advanced with it, we could start using ternaries and duaries to not even need the brackets, but maybe not yet. So I'll just label that as ES6 syntax. Okay, so dot map is the last one we'll cover here. There's about 6 more we'll cover in time. They all follow this pattern though, so you understand one, the other ones start to click. So map, like filter, always returns a new array. And the new array will always be the same size as the beginning array. So I give it an array with 10 items. I'm always going to get an array with 10 items back. But what map lets me do is says the current item you're on, alter it this way and put it in the new array. So it's kind of like the forEach. It's going to hit everything, but it also lets me change it. So let's say we have an array of names. John, Joe, and Sarah. And we would like to add an S to the end of all those strings for some ambiguous reason. Well, we could use map for that. We can say map, loop over this array, and every string you encounter, add an S to the end of it, and put that word in the new array. So we'll say names, const new names, because it's going to return a new array, is names.map. And this is a higher order method, so it takes a function as a parameter. And it will provide us each item as it loops through our array. So I'll just say name. Map over my names, and for each name in that array, do the following. And what did we say we want to do? Add an S to the end of it. So we'll just return, we'll say return the current name plus the letter S added to it. So now console log the new names. And now I got John's, Joe's, and Sarah's. Right, so the syntax is the exact same for all of these, but what you're saying to return will really depend on what you're doing. Why are you using filter? It's because I have a big array of things and I need a smaller subset from that big array. Why am I using map? I have an array of things and I need all those things changed somehow and have them be in a new array. So loop over all this and create this new array from that data where I have all these names just have an S on. And we can see that if I console log names down here, we'll see that that was left alone. There's no S, but the new array it gave us has the S. And this is important. We don't want to mutate our data in our functions. Heavy stuff, but very cool. Yeah. As far as saying, here's my array of names, I want new names to be something else. I could say instead of returning a string, return an object that has a dot name equal to the current name plus S. And now I'm given an array of strings, I get back an array of objects. Thank you, map. Let's look at that. Node app.js. I was given this string and I turned it into an array of objects, just like that. So there's a lot of power behind these. This is what we're going to start off with, simple mutations. But when we get to React, you will hear the word, you'll hear probably the other class talk about, oh, just map that out, or just map out that list. We use map on everything we do in React. It's essential. Because who wants to write 1,000 tweets, 1,000 tweet divs? No one. So we'll use map to say, here's my array of all the tweet objects, return a div with the tweet inside of it. We get 1,000 tweets to fill up on the page, but that won't work with plain JavaScript. We need React to have that happen. Right, so map, filter, and for each, just to kind of get an idea of the syntax. Along with this, I'm going to give you this exercise, employee records. This is for constructor functions. So you're going to make an array of names of named employees. Then you'll make a employee constructor function with the first 3 attributes at the time of instantiation, and the 4th will be defaulted to full-time. That is a mouthful. The constructor will also have a method called printEmployeeForm that prints the employee's information to the console. You will then instantiate 3 employees, override a status, call their method, and generate employees into the employees array using any method. You could use forEach or you could use a for loop. But then this is what it's talking about. It's saying make an employee constructor that takes in the employee's name and the other data is showing here. So name, job title, salary, and status. But then all of them will also receive the print employee form function. They don't have to pass that in, it's just assigned to the object. And then you get to use it. If I need to re-explain anything on this write-up, because these are all new words today, instantiation, constructor, attributes within functions, let me know. So that's one exercise to practice constructor functions. And then we get an exercise for map and filter. 3 or 4 problems for map and filter to work through. So what this will have you do, it'll say make an array of numbers that are doubles of the first array. So you're given this code. What this is their function. You can copy and paste this into VS Code, write all your code here, and then here's your test case. All you have to do is say node app.js, it'll call your function, pass in the test case, and as long as you see this in the console, you've solved it. So there's a few of these for map and there's a few of these for filter. I'll work for the next 5 minutes here to get these notes out for the RPG and the higher order methods we just looked at. And then I'll do a one-on-one with a couple of you to finish off the day.